My name is Nathan, and I can't explain what happened during our last camping trip. I don't think anyone would believe me even if I tried. But I have to write it down because I need to know that I'm not crazy. It was me, my brother Matt, and our two friends, Olivia and Ben. We set up camp deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. The first night was perfect warm fire, clear sky, and the quiet hum of nature all around us. But when we woke up the next morning, it was still dark. I remember checking my phone, expecting it to be around dawn, but the screen read 8:14 a.m. Confused, I stepped out of the tent. The air was still, unnaturally so. No birds chirping, no rustling leaves, just an eerie silence. The sky remained as black as it had been hours before. "It's just overcast," Ben said, rubbing his eyes. "A storm's probably coming." But there were no clouds, no moon, no stars, just an endless, suffocating night. We waited, expecting the sun to rise. It never did. Panic crept in. Olivia checked her watch, had stopped. Matt's phone battery, fully charged the night before, was now dead. Mine wasn't responding. We built a second fire to keep warm, but unease settled over us like a heavy fog. Hours passed, then more. The firewood supply dwindled. Hunger gnawed at our stomachs, and the night stretched on, unbroken and endless. Then came the footsteps, faint, at first, like someone pacing just beyond the trees. Slow, deliberate, circling our camp. "We're not alone," Olivia whispered, gripping my arm. Her face was pale in the dim firelight. Ben grabbed his flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing, just the endless void of the forest. Then Matt screamed. We turned to see him backing away from the trees. His face drained of color. "There's something out there," he gasped. I saw eyes. We didn't wait to find out what it was. We packed our things in record time and started hiking back the way we had come. Or at least, we thought we were. The forest never ended. No matter how far we walked, our camp always reappeared ahead of us. Our footprints in the dirt, the ones we thought we had left behind, were fresh, as if we had never moved at all. And then we saw it, a figure standing just outside the reach of our firelight. Tall, unmoving, watching. Olivia sobbed. Ben clutched a pocket knife, though we all knew it wouldn't help. The figure took a step forward, then another. Its movements were unnatural, as if it were struggling to mimic how humans walked. And its face, it had no face. I don't remember what happened next. I only remember waking up in my bed, back home, with dirt under my nails and scratches on my arms. My phone was on my nightstand, its battery full. Matt, Olivia, and Ben don't talk about that night. I don't either. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, the darkness feels different, like it's watching me back. My name is Lucas, and I wish we had never set foot in that cursed place. It was supposed to be a normal camping trip. Just me, my girlfriend Haley, and our friends Mark and Sophia. We had been hiking all day and decided to set up camp in a clearing near a small creek. The air was cool, the sky clear, and the forest around us felt peaceful. That peace didn't last long. While gathering firewood, Mark stumbled upon an old wooden cabin, half hidden behind thick bushes. "Guys, check this out," he called, waving us over. The cabin looked ancient. The wood was rotten, the windows covered in grime, and the door slightly ajar. Something about it made my skin crawl, but Mark was already stepping inside. "We should go back," Haley whispered, grabbing my arm. But it was too late inside. The air was thick with dust, and a terrible smell lingered, something old and rotting. The furniture was overturned, the floor littered with broken glass and decayed papers. On the far wall, strange symbols were carved into the wood, their meaning unknown. Sophia shuddered. I don't like this. Let's go. As if on cue, the front door slammed shut behind us. Haley screamed. Mark rushed to the door, yanking at the handle. It stuck. He yelled, his voice laced with panic. Then the whispers started. Low, at first, like the wind slipping through the cracks. But then they grew, overlapping, coming from everywhere. Words we couldn't understand, voices that weren't our own. The room darkened, the air pressing in around us like invisible hands squeezing our throats. Then, we saw them. Figures moved in the shadows, shifting just out of sight. Tall, gaunt, their eyes hollow and black. They stood in the corners of the cabin, watching. Sophia sobbed, clinging to Mark. Please, let us out, she begged. The whispers turned to laughter. The floor beneath us groaned, and the walls began to close in. I could barely breathe, the space around us growing impossibly tight. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the door creaked open on its own. We didn't hesitate. We bolted out of the cabin, running until we reached our camp, our lungs burning. When we turned back to look, the cabin was gone. Only a patch of dead, blackened earth remained where it had stood. We didn't stay to question it. We packed our things and left immediately. But even now, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, hearing those whispers echoing in my ears. And when I look into the dark corners of my room, I wonder if they followed us home. My name is Adam, and I never believed in ghost stories until the night my best friend disappeared without a trace. It was supposed to be a relaxing trip. Just me, my girlfriend Brooke, and our friends Jason and Olivia. We drove out to a remote camping site, miles away from civilization. The air was crisp, the fire was warm, and the night felt perfect. But everything changed on the second night. Jason was the first to vanish. He had gotten up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, stepping just beyond the fire's glow into the trees. We barely noticed him leave, assuming he'd be back in a few minutes. But those minutes stretched into half an hour, then an hour. When we called his name, there was no response. Brooke and Olivia started to panic. Maybe he got lost, Olivia suggested, her voice trembling. That's impossible, I said. He had his flashlight. He wouldn't just wander off. We searched the area for hours, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The deeper we went into the woods, the more wrong everything felt. The trees seemed taller, the silence more oppressive. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, we found Jason's flashlight. It was lying in the middle of a small clearing, still on, its beam pointing into the abyss of the trees. But Jason was nowhere to be seen. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just his flashlight, left, as if he had simply evaporated into the night. Panic set in. We ran back to camp, locked ourselves in our tents, and tried to convince ourselves that he would come back. But deep down, we knew he wouldn't. The real horror began when we found the footprints. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, we saw them footprints circling our tents. Not just Jason's, but someone else's. Someone barefoot, whose prints were too long and too deep to be human. Brooke gasped, pointing at the prints. They weren't here last night, she whispered. That was the final straw. We packed up as quickly as we could and bolted for the car, leaving everything behind. But as we drove off, I made the mistake of looking in the rearview mirror. There, standing at the tree line, was Jason. Only it wasn't him. His head was tilted too far to the side, his arms hanging limply at his sides, and even from that distance, I could see his mouth stretched into an unnatural, inhuman grin. I floored the gas pedal. Jason was never found, but every so often, I have nightmares where I'm back in that forest, standing in that clearing, staring at his abandoned flashlight, and in those nightmares, I hear my name being whispered from the trees. My name is Daniel, and what happened to us during that camping trip still haunts me to this day. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway, just me, my girlfriend Sarah, and our two best friends, Jake and Emily. We drove deep into the forest, far from any other campers, looking for the perfect spot to set up our tents. The air was crisp, the scent of pine needles filling our lungs as we laughed and joked around. The first night was peaceful. We sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows, sharing ghost stories, and enjoying the warmth of the flames. But when we woke up the next morning, something felt off. Jake was the first to notice the footprints. They weren't ours. They circled our tents, uneven and strangely deep in the damp soil. Maybe an animal, Emily suggested, but even she didn't seem convinced. The prints were human, but the spacing between them was unnatural, too long, as if whoever made them was taking impossibly large steps. We brushed it off, pretending it wasn't a big deal. But that night, as we sat by the fire again, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest around us seemed eerily silent. No owls hooting, no leaves rustling in the breeze, just silence. Then I saw it. A shadow standing just beyond the tree line. Tall, unmoving, watching. "Do you see that?" I whispered to Sarah, my voice barely above a breath. She turned her head and gasped, gripping my arm tightly. The others followed our gaze, and as if on cue, the shadow slipped back into the darkness of the trees. Jake jumped to his feet, grabbing a flashlight. "Who's out there?" he shouted. No response. He aimed the light into the trees, but there was nothing. Just the empty woods, stretching endlessly around us. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound made my heart race. And in the morning, the footprints were back this time, even closer to our tents. Panic set in. We decided to cut our trip short and leave as soon as we packed up. But as we hurriedly stuffed our gear into our backpacks, Emily let out a strangled cry. There, on the trunk of a nearby tree, was a message carved into the bark. "Don't leave, I like watching." My blood ran cold. We didn't waste another second. We ran to the car, throwing our gear inside without care. As I started the engine, I dared to look back one last time. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, its head tilted unnaturally to the side, watching us with an intensity that sent ice through my veins. And as we sped away down the dirt road, I swear I saw it step forward 1, 2, 3 long strides before the trees swallowed it whole. We never went camping again. My name is Ethan, and I will never forget the night the forest spoke to us. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. Me, my best friend Kyle, his girlfriend Lily, and my sister Rachel. We had all grown up together, and this was meant to be our last adventure before we went our separate ways for college. We set up camp in a quiet clearing, the scent of pine thick in the cool night air. The first evening was perfect, toasting marshmallows, telling scary stories, and laughing under the starlit sky. But as midnight approached, the wind shifted, carrying with it a strange sound, soft whispers drifting through the trees. "Did you hear that?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We all stopped talking, straining our ears. The wind rustled the leaves, but beneath it, there was something else, something human. Lily laughed nervously. "It's probably just the wind playing tricks on us." Kyle nodded, though he didn't look convinced. "Yeah, let's just go to bed. We've got a long hike in the morning." We turned in for the night, but sleep didn't come easily. The whispering grew louder, words just on the edge of understanding. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart pounding. Was it coming from the trees, or inside my own head? The next morning, I woke up feeling drained, like I hadn't slept at all. Judging by the dark circles under everyone's eyes, I wasn't the only one. Over breakfast, Rachel finally spoke up. "I heard voices last night." We all exchanged uneasy glances. "Me too," Kyle admitted. And it wasn't just the wind. They were saying something. I felt my stomach twist. What did they say? He hesitated. I don't know. It was just whispers. But I felt like they were trying to tell me something, like they were inside my head. That night, the whispers returned, clearer this time. They called our names. I bolted upright, sweat dripping down my neck. I could hear Rachel in the other tent, gasping for breath. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and unzipped my tent, finding her sitting up, trembling. Ethan, she whispered. They said my name. I turned to wake Kyle and Lily, but their tent was empty. My pulse spiked. The fire had burned down to embers. Their backpacks still where we had left them. They wouldn't have just left without telling us. Rachel and I grabbed our flashlights and searched the area. Kyle, Lily, I shouted into the dark, no answer. Then from deep within the forest, the whispers rose in unison. We have them now. A chill ran through my body. The sound didn't come from one place. It came from everywhere. We ran. We left everything behind, our tents, our bags, even our shoes. We ran until we saw the glint of Rachel's car under the moonlight. As soon as we locked the doors, the whispers stopped. We waited until sunrise before driving back to camp. Kyle and Lily were never found. Their belongings remained untouched. The police chalked it up to a simple disappearance, but I know better. The forest took them, and if we had stayed a moment longer, it would have taken us too.